I'm going to give you some context to this story here. My family on both sides, my mom and my dad, immigrated from a small region in Lithuania, just outside of Vilna, down to South Africa. And in the early 1900s, there was this Jewish immigration. And then from 1970 to around now, most of that family has dispersed all over the world. So we're kind of like the second diaspora. And this magazine has kind of become an emblem of my family roots. A wealthy uncle of mine put this together to try to keep his family talking. It's a 20-page glossy magazine that we get 4 times a year. And after both my grandparents died in 1999 on my mom's side, and I sat down with my grandmother on my dad's side and asked her to tell me all about her life in South Africa, and that inspired this trip that I took in 2004 to South Africa. And this is me with my great aunt Esther, who I just remember very fondly. She had just recently been widowed and lived in this huge house with a big garden in this kind of West Van enclave just around the bend from Cape Town, on beaches and cafes, and that's her daughter Jill. I hung out with her quite a bit too. She had this huge house with a garden and a gardener, a maid. So it was a very different lifestyle. Her daughter Jill, again with her daughter Kim, and this is on a beach that my parents would go to all the time when they were kids, Muizenberg, which is kind of on the other side of the Cape, the warm Indian Ocean. So this kind of this part of my journey gave me a glimpse into what life for me might have been like had I lived in South Africa. My cousin on the other side had been mugged just like a month before I'd arrived, just there in front of her door. And I'll never forget how she told me, because it was like, she was telling me about a restaurant that she just visited. It was just so normal. This is a typical shack in one of the hundreds of shanty towns on the outskirts of cities like Cape Town and all over South Africa. And while this kind of living, standard of living disparity is here in Canada too, you kind of, we're sheltered from it here. And you can try to isolate yourself from it in South Africa, but it'll find you, right? So my solo journey began in Cape Town, which is there at the kind of bottom left-hand corner. And I hopped on a train and went up to this little city in the interior of South Africa called Bloemfontein, and everyone just could not understand why I was going there. And then I hopped on a bus and went to this little town of Vicksburg on the corner of Lesotho. And that was my holy grail. That's why I was going. This is the Hotel Hoogland, which used to be the new Vicksburg Travelers Salesman Hotel that my grandparents ran in the 50s. And I was expecting it to be this sort of mysterious, magical place, and it wasn't at all. It was actually quite dull and boring. But the town of Vicksburg really captured my imagination. For example, post-apartheid, this was in 2004, so this is the 10 years after apartheid had ended, and East Indians weren't allowed into the Orange Free State for all of apartheid. And so now they've been kind of released, and there was this really vibrant, dynamic East Indian community there. But there was more kind of change afoot in Vicksburg. The landscape was starting to be overtaken by the shanty town just outside there called Maputo. And one of the more interesting stories that I uncovered while I was there was the exhumation of the Vicksburg Jewish Cemetery, which all of 10 gravestones that have been literally squeezed out by the expansion of Maputo. And so this is like serious business for Jews, right? The South African Jewish Board of Deputies had to bring in Orthodox rabbis to do the exhumation, and every bone has to be placed in the exact order that it's, or formation that it was in. And so this was kind of a shocking event to consider, right? It was the vandalism of the grave sites that had led to the exhumation, but then of course it all comes back to this, right? Where else were the farm laborers or the miners or the Lesotho workers and their families supposed to go? So Lesotho is a really stunningly beautiful country. It's literally up in the mountains with a remarkable history. King Mwishiwishwe is one of the only African kings who never surrendered to the colonial rule. And eventually, Lesotho became a protectorate of the British Empire, but it was never occupied. And the cynical historian will tell you that that's because Lesotho had very little for the colonies to take. Besides the diamonds, which were excavated sort of brutally, Lesotho had two major exports: water from its mountain ranges and labor. So both of which flowed weekly into South Africa, to the mines, to the farms, to the middle-class homes, and most of these workers flowed through Vicksburg. Okay, so this was my image of what an Afrikaner cattle farmer would look like, right? But I was actually shocked to meet Charles, who totally blew this this image I had in my mind of the water. We met at a bar near the hotel that I was researching, and I told him I was there researching this book, and I'd taken an interest in the passion South Africans had for cattle. So the next morning, 5 a.m., we were going for a stroll up the road from Vicksburg to meet some passionate cattle farmers Charles was working with. So these men were all between the ages of 40 and 80, and they were all ex-farm laborers who had been kicked off the farms they'd worked at for decades, with nothing but the few cattle they had. So they'd been kicked off because at the end of apartheid, the rules changed, and farms couldn't pay farm laborers nothing, right? So they ended up there in these kind of townships, and the cattle became a huge problem. And while the farmers all knew how to take care of a small number of cows, they didn't know how to take care of a large number. And so Charles had decided to give up his own farm to come and live and work with these farmers and help them put together a collective farm of their own. And it was remarkable to see the ramshackle cattle farm, grazing land, and milking lots that these farmers had created. So it was just one morning on my visit, but this meeting has stuck with me for a really long time. I never got to write the story that I wanted to write about them. The logistics of researching the story proved way too challenging. But I've always wanted to share this moment, and these men. Certain moments have a surprising ripple effect in our lives.